What happens when you're compelled to walk away from the life you've built and start all over again? That's the question I'm going to be answering today as I bring you one very curious true story and three related very brilliant books. Today I'm going to bring you the story of the Trump family, who suddenly, all of them together, left their seemingly idyllic life in rural Australia and went on the run for no apparent reason. It was a case that mystified the whole nation. But before we get into that, if you're a fan of curious true stories and you love a good book recommendation, then you are in the right place, because that's all we do. And I upload every single Sunday. So click the like button if you like this video, it means a huge amount. And subscribe and hit the notification bell to make sure that you don't miss a single future episode. Now on to the Trump family. 51-year-old Mark Trump and his wife, 52-year-old Jacoba Trump, ran a red currant farm and an earth moving business from their property in Sylvan, which is a suburb on the outskirts of Melbourne. Their grown-up children, 29-year-old Rihanna, 25-year-old Mitchell and 22-year-old Ella, all lived at home and worked on the farm. They were an ordinary, hard-working family. That is until the 29th of August 2016, when the whole family upped and left without telling a single soul what was going on. And on the kitchen table, they left their passports, their driving licenses, their wallets, their ID, their bank cards, everything, including their mobile phones, and seemingly set off on a cash-only, tech-free road trip. But it all seemed a little bit more than that, and to their friends and family, who suddenly couldn't get hold of them, they'd been told nothing about this road trip. It all felt a little bit sinister. They had no warning of what they were about to do, and it was very, very out of character. So it felt like they were trying to get away from something or somebody, and in a very, very big hurry. So the next day, which was the 30th of August, friends and family rang the police and said, there's something going on here. And the police said, well, they're grown-ups, they're adults. If they want to go on a spontaneous road trip, there's not really anything any of us can do about it. But because the family was so adamant this was out of character, and because they felt something sketchy was going on, the police decided that they would go and do a safe and well check at the farm in Sylvan. And so they went up there, and what they found at the farm was very puzzling, because outside were all the vehicles, and they were all open and the keys were all in the ignitions. The only vehicle missing was Ella, 22-year-old Ella's Peugeot SUV, which was the car that they had taken on the road trip. The front door was open and the police went inside, and the house was in a bit of a chaotic state. It wasn't in a chaotic state like somebody had broken in. It was more like somebody had been looking for something in a big hurry and searching, because there were piles of financial and business documents, all very much in order, in certain piles around the house, but everything else was in chaos. So it felt as though before they left, they'd been searching for an important document of some sort. So the police found all the wallets, the passports, the ID and everything on the kitchen table, and all the mobile phones, except Mitchell, the son, the 25-year-old son. His mobile phone wasn't there. He must have taken it with him. And it transpired later that he did in fact take it with him, against his family's wishes. And about 20 miles into this road trip, the parents realised that Mitchell had got his mobile phone with him, despite what he'd been instructed to do. They were very angry about it, because the father said that people could track them and trace where they were using their mobile phones. So he insisted that Mitchell threw his mobile phone out of the window as the car was driving along the road. Of course, at the time, the police knew none of this. They just found all this stuff on the kitchen table. But for the fact that Mitchell's phone wasn't there, it suggested that maybe he wasn't quite as on board with what was going on as everyone else in the family. So could you get a 25-year-old man to throw their mobile phone out of a window in a moving car if they weren't a little bit suspicious of what was going on, if they didn't buy in a little bit? to what the parents were thinking. I am not sure, but that is what happened. But the police, from what they found at the house, agreed with the family that, you know, there's something quite sinister going on here. And they searched around the house and there was no evidence that the family were in any kind of financial trouble. There were no money worries. There was no evidence of drugs being taken at the house. And none of the family members were belonging to any kind of church or any cult. So it's not as though they've been persuaded by others to do a runner, because that's very much what it looked like. So the police are really concerned now about the Trump family and why they had left in such a hurry and why they had left all this stuff behind, things that you would normally be taking on a road trip. And so they began a massive manhunt for this family. And of course the media got hold of this and the media blew up. Because the media love a good puzzle, as we know here in the UK. If there's anything that needs solving, the media are always on it. So let's take a look at what happened to the Trump family when they left their farm in Sylvan that Monday morning. We already know that they left on the morning of Monday the 29th of August 2016, and they were in an Ella's Peugeot SUV, as we said. Now they drove the whole of the first day and into the first night until they reached a place called Bathurst in New South Wales, which is about 500 miles away from their home in Sylvan. Now they reached Bathurst about 7 o'clock in the morning the following day, and it was there that 25-year-old Mitchell, who was the son who threw his phone out of the window, it was there that he decided to part company with the rest of the family and go off on his own, and the family did not try to stop him. The rest of the family instead drove to a place called Jenolan Caves, which is about 50 miles away from Bathurst. And when they reached the Jenolan Caves, 22-year-old Ella, who owned the car that they were driving, and 29-year-old Rihanna, her older sister, also decided to leave the family. And they must have felt pretty desperate at this point, because totally out of character, the girls stole a car in order to get away. Obviously they've got no money, no credit cards, no driver's license, no ID. So perhaps they felt that this was the only way to do it. Now Ella and Rihanna drove their stolen car to a place called Goulburn, which is about a 2.5-hour journey from the Jenolan Caves. And when they arrived there, the sisters reported their parents, Mark and Jacoba, missing. They went straight to the police station and reported them. And this is where national curiosity really ramped up, because until then the Australian public had been seeing this as a kind of road trip gone wrong, and they thought it was quite laughable that this family had gone on a road trip and they kept zigzagging around and getting lost. It wasn't as though they were in the outback, they were on, you know, normal regular roads, and they were getting lost, they thought, on this road trip. So it was seen as a kind of form of light entertainment. But when the girls reported their family missing, their parents missing, then things took a much sinister turn. At the petrol station in Goulburn, Ella and her sister also decided to part company. So 22-year-old Ella wanted to go home, have a look at her horses, check them, feed them, make sure they were okay. And it wasn't quite obvious why Rihanna wouldn't go with her, but she wouldn't. So Ella went off on her own, and 29-year-old Rihanna actually climbed into the back of a ute at the petrol station while the driver was paying for his fuel. The driver came back, the gentleman's name is Kevin Whitaker. He came back to his ute, didn't realise this girl had climbed in the back, and off he set. And it was about an hour into his journey when he heard this kicking sound coming from the back of the ute. And he thought, I don't know what that is, let's pull up and investigate. So he pulled over, got out of his ute and went to the back to look at the tray. And there sat this 29-year-old girl. Now, he said that she was in a catatonic state. She didn't know who she was, where she was, why she was there, what her name was. So clearly she wasn't catatonic as such, but she was very, very distressed and mentally unwell. So he rang the police. Now you can just imagine the phone call that he made, like, there's a girl in the back of my ute. No, she's not in a great state. I don't know anything about it. Can you come and find out what's going on? So that must have been quite a tricky call to make, but he made it, and the police came, realised who she was, and took her to the local hospital at Goulburn, where she was admitted under the psychiatric team, and she actually ended up staying there for several months. Now Ella fared much better. She managed to make her way back somehow without ID or money or credit cards to the family home in Sylvan by Tuesday night, so the following day from when they disappeared. And the police were waiting for her there, obviously, with a lot of questions. And the next morning, so Wednesday the 31st of August, 2 days after they'd taken this mysterious road trip, Mitchell also managed to find his way home. He took a lot longer because he took a series of trains, a shed load of trains to get home. How he managed it with no money, no credit cards, no ID, I have no idea. Perhaps he did a little bit of fare dodging, understandably, but he got home eventually. And perhaps to ease the public's mind, Ella and Mitchell did a press conference to explain what had happened, but they didn't really explain anything. And they kind of dodged the media's questions, saying they couldn't really explain it, they were baffled. They didn't understand their parents' behaviour, they just wanted everybody back home as soon as possible. They said they were as perplexed as to what happened as the rest of Australia, and they made an emotional plea for their parents to get in touch and come home. But the public were convinced that Ella and Mitchell were hiding something and not telling the truth. So by this point, 2 days after the mystery began, we have 3 family members who are now accounted for. Mitchell and Ella made it back home, and Rihanna is safe on a psychiatric ward. But Mark and Jacoba, the parents, are still missing, and so the police really extended their search for these two, really concerned about their well-being. The search extended from Victoria into New South Wales based on this new information that Ella and Mitchell had given them. So what exactly happened to Mark and Jacoba after Rihanna and Ella left them at the Jenolan Caves? Now the couple kind of backtracked, having driven all that way through the night. They then backtracked and drove back again towards their home for about another 6.5 hours to a place called Wangaratta in Victoria, and it was there that Mark and Jacoba somehow became separated. After driving hundreds of miles back to Sylvan, Jacoba then turned around and went in the opposite direction again. Now Mark stayed with the car, so Jacoba was forced to use public transport, and she travelled 220 miles away again from their home to a place called Yas in New South Wales. And she arrived there on Thursday the 1st of September, so that's 4 days after all this began. Now Jacoba must have been acting quite strangely, because a member of the public was concerned about her, and they supported her and helped her to get to the local hospital. Now the local hospital recognised her because, you know, the faces of this family had been all over the media and all over the news, and so they rang the police, and the police came to the hospital, and they took Jacoba to the same hospital her daughter Rihanna was at in Goulburn. So she was reunited with her daughter again, and she too was admitted under the psychiatric team, and like her daughter, she stayed in the hospital for several months afterwards. Now, just as an aside, always be that member of the public, that person who helped Jacoba, who realised that she was distressed, that she was mentally unwell, that she was emotionally distraught. Instead of walking in the opposite direction, they helped her and got to the hospital, and it could have ended so differently if they hadn't done that. So always be that member of the public. Always notice when somebody's distressed. Always be aware around you in case there's somebody who needs some support, because without that, stories may not have the happiest of endings. So that just left the father, Mark, and what happened to him? He stayed around Wangaratta, and he was allegedly seen driving very dangerously and tailgating this other car at about 10 o'clock at night. And the couple in the car that was being tailgated said he was so close they couldn't even see his headlights through the back window because he was driving so dangerously close to them. And they thought, you know what, we're going to pull up, this isn't going to end well. So they pulled over, and Mark pulled over as well. And Mark got out of the car, and he started running straight at them. But then he stopped and he looked at them and he turned around and disappeared into a local park. The couple called the police came, they searched all over the park, couldn't find him, but they could recover the car, the Peugeot that he'd been driving, so they knew this was the guy that they were looking for. And the following morning there were reports that a local motel had a room being broken into, and the police believed that was Mark trying to find somewhere to stay the night. The following morning, Mark was eventually found, and he was found wandering up a road near Wangaratta Airport. And when the police caught up with him, he was very angry, very agitated at being found. He was taken to the local police station where he was assessed under the Mental Health Act, and they talked to him for about 5 hours about what had been going on. And eventually he was released into the care of his brother, who happened to be a police officer. He was still very angry when he was released from the police station. As you can see in this photograph, he is not in the best of moods. You know, this is understandable. There was a ton of journalists and photographers outside the police station, all wanting a piece of him, which is not what you need when you've been through an ordeal like this. And of course, the public speculated that he was angry because all of this media attention would make it impossible for him to hide from whoever he was running from, because there were people who truly believed that they were running for a good reason. Later, however, Mark apologised for his behaviour, and he thanked the community and the police and the media even for caring and being concerned about both him and his family, which I thought was very magnanimous of him under the circumstances, because basically people were just being very, very nosy. Now, this all happened 10 years ago, and to this day we do not know why the Trump family suddenly left their life and went on this strange and mysterious and convoluted road trip, and why one by one they kind of separated from each other. And there are very many theories about why this happened, but before we go into those, I'm going to talk to you about 3 very brilliant books which all contain the theme of people being compelled to leave their regular life and start all over again. So book number 1 is a book that we all know and love, I'm sure. It's Rachel Joyce's brilliant The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry. Just in case you're not familiar with this story, Harold Fry is a pensioner who lives a very ordinary life in Devon with his wife Maureen. And after he hears that a former colleague, Queenie Hennessy, is dying of cancer and she's in a hospice in Berwick-upon-Tweed, he writes a letter to her. But when he finishes this letter, he thinks, I don't think this is good enough. I think, you know, more needs to be done. This is very unworthy. And so he decides he needs to walk from Devon to Berwick-upon-Tweed to go and see Queenie in the hope that she can hang on until he gets there. And so he sets off on this massive 500-mile journey, wearing his canvas deck shoes, which is just the loveliest image. And even now, years after reading this book, if I'm driving along and I see a man of a certain age walking by the side of the road in canvas shoes, I think, there's Harold, bless him, there's Harold. It's such a beautiful, hopeful, wonderful, funny story. And it was actually made into a film, a very brilliant film starring Jim Broadbent. So if you haven't read the book and you fancy watching the movie, check that out, because it really is absolutely wonderful. So that is book 1. Book 2 is William Golding's classic novel, Lord of the Flies. And I'm sure, again, many of you will be familiar with this story from the film, if not the book. But once again, just in case, this is a story set during wartime evacuation when a British plane crashes on a remote tropical island, and the only survivors are a group of young schoolboys. Left to their own devices and without any adult supervision, they are forced to start a new society with new rules, and they have to agree on these new rules. Things, however, do not go to plan when the main group splits into 2 factions, and any rules are thrown out of the window, leading to tragedy. Poor Piggy is all I can say. Piggy is one of my favourite literary characters. This is just a wonderful novel. It's an amazing story. It's a wonderful exploration of humans and humanity. And very often when you get kind of 100 best English language books, Lord of the Flies is very often up there with the best of them, and rightly so. It's a wonderful story. And thirdly, a novel which you may not have heard of. It's a 1963 novel by an Austrian writer called Marlon Haushofer. I do apologise if I butchered that name. and it's considered her finest work. It's actually a dystopian novel, and it's translated by a gentleman called Sean Whiteside, which is very important to note. This is a story about a 40-something-year-old woman, and we never actually find out her name, but she goes on holiday for a few days to a lodge in the Austrian mountains, and she wakes up one morning to find that a transparent wall has been placed that closes her off from the outside world. Now she can see through this wall to the world beyond, and she notices that all the animals and people that she can pick out, and there are very few because it's a rural area that she's in, but she can see a few things, and everyone out there appears to be frozen in time, appears to have died, the cows, the people, the cats, everything. So she's struggling to survive and come to terms with the fact that she's now in isolation with only a cat, a dog and a cow for company on her side of the transparent wall. And she writes an account of her isolation and how she tries to start again. And that's what this book is. It's her account of what happens. And I think one of the greatest things about this book, and the thing that makes it so impactful, is that it's such an extraordinary dystopian tale. And if you love dystopian tales, you will adore this. It's brilliant. But it's written in this very ordinary voice of this middle-aged, middle-class woman in a very conversational style. So you've got all these big issues, these strange issues going on, but you're being told in a very ordinary way, which I think really adds to how powerful this novel is. So there are 3 examples of literary fiction of people walking away from their lives. But let's get back to the Trump family and find out just why they did exactly that, and what happened on that mysterious road trip. So in our literary examples, there are a couple of occasions where people are forced to start again and live a new life. But in real life, people very often choose to do it. And one of the most famous examples in recent years is a gentleman called Ian Usher, who put his entire life for sale on eBay following a divorce from his wife because he wanted a fresh start. Now, included in this listing was his home in Perth, all his belongings, his car, his jet skis, an introduction to his friends, and a 2-week trial at his job as a carpet store salesman. What he didn't envisage was selling the rights to his story to Disney, who wanted to make it into a movie. In Japan also, disappearing from your life willingly is big business, and companies exist who will help you to do that and facilitate the whole process. They help you to disappear into thin air, and the people who use these services are called juhatsu, which is the Japanese word for evaporation. And apparently it's much easier to become one of Japan's missing people, as it's a country where privacy is much more closely guarded. But the mysterious disappearance of the Trump family is a lot more sinister than Ian and his eBay and all the people in Japan who want to start all over again. Let's look at the many theories as to what happened to the Trumps and why they suddenly decided to go on the mysterious road trip. The first widely discussed theory is that there was something in the water at their farm in Sylvan, either a toxin, a chemical, a gas, something that caused an altered mind state. However, this theory doesn't really hold true, because the water supply to the Trumps' farm at Sylvan also supplied the vast majority of people in Melbourne. So why would the Trumps be the only ones to suffer from what appears from the outside to be some kind of psychosis? Similarly, people have wondered if it was some product, some chemical that the Trumps used on their farm, whether they sprayed their crops with something, whether it was a byproduct of some kind of pesticide, because there are some organopesticides which can cause delusions and paranoia, but nothing was found on the property. There was no evidence of anything like this. And the police very quickly dismissed that theory. Interestingly, mouldy bread can also cause psychosis. There's a theory that mouldy rye contains this thing called ergot. So mouldy rye in the fields contains ergot. The mouldy rye is then made into bread, and the ergot is ingested by human beings. And that ergot can cause psychosis and paranoia. It was actually cited in the Salem witch trials as being a cause of mass hysteria that happened around then, but historians have dismissed it, so there's no correlation between the behaviour at the Salem witch trials and the effects of ergot on human behaviour. So it really probably isn't going to explain this situation either. There is also a theory that the mob were involved in this, which I think is people getting a little bit desperate, because there is no evidence that this family had anything to do with the mob. But there are certain people that do believe that the Trumps were in fact lucid, perfectly rational, and they were running away from the mob. But if you take that theory, how would you then explain that the parents were quite happy for their children to peel off and just clear off, and they didn't try to stop them, they didn't try and go after them? Which is not what you would do if the mob were after you, because if the mob were after you, then they mean business. So as we said, there were no financial problems, no money worries, and also there was no drugs at the house, no evidence that people were taking drugs. And the last most popular theory is the family was suffering from a shared psychiatric condition. Now, just as a caveat before we go into this, it is extremely unethical and quite dangerous to start diagnosing people over the internet, people you have never met before. But this is a theory which does kind of fit into what happened to the Trump family. So I'm presenting it to you as a general discussion. I'm not diagnosing anybody with anything, but it is interesting to think about it alongside this case. Now, this rare psychiatric condition that I'm talking about is called a folie à deux, which translated literally means madness of two, or in this case 5, so it would perhaps be folie à cinq, I have no idea. Now, it's a shared condition where one person, the dominant person, has very fixed, paranoid ideas, these very kind of vivid and rigid delusions, and that dominant person then shares them with the rest of the group, or shares them with another person. And it's usually found in relationships, husbands and wives will experience folie à deux, or brother and sister who live together, very close relationship, or as in this case with the Trumps, a very close family living in the same house. So what will happen is one person will start with paranoid delusions and psychosis, and then they will kind of almost infect, for want of a better word, other people in the house until it becomes a shared delusion or a shared psychosis. And when you think about what happened with the Trump family, you might then perhaps speculate that the father, Mark, may have been the person who began with these delusions. And it did transpire afterwards that Mark had had a very stressful time mentally leading up to this incident. So he may perhaps have started off with a delusion which he then passed on to his wife and then passed on to the children. And if you think about Mitchell and how Mitchell took his phone with him, and Mitchell has said himself he wasn't particularly on board with what was going on, he has also said that he just wanted to go along with them because he didn't really believe what they were saying, but he wanted to make sure they were okay. And that perhaps explains why he was the first one to peel off and go. And with Ella, maybe she wasn't quite as kind of on board with this as everyone else, so she was the second person to make her way home. So you can see with this idea of a shared delusion or a folie à deux, that it could possibly have been the case with the Trump family. Interestingly enough, folie à deux was actually first recognised in France in 1877 when a married couple came to the attention of a physician, and this married couple had the shared delusion that someone was coming into their house at night, putting on their shoes and treading dirt and dust all over the floor, and they were the first people to be diagnosed officially with folie à deux. Thankfully, unlike fiction, most people who decide they want to disappear from their lives and start again do so willingly, and unlike the Trumps, do not suffer with a possible shared paranoia. It's the idea of a fresh start and greener grass, which is very alluring, and it's just appealing, isn't it, to think we can just wipe the slate clean, have another go and start afresh. However, it is always wise to remember, if you are of a certain age like me, the rise and fall of the infamous sitcom character Reggie Perrin, written by the brilliant David Nobbs. He was a gentleman whose increasing dissatisfaction with his middle management life and his constant Walter Mitty dreams eventually was prompted to fake his own death and start again. But poor Reggie missed his original life so much that he spent the entire second series trying to find his way back to it. The grass, as we know, is not always greener, and the new slate we have acquired may become even messier than the one that we had in the first place. I hope you enjoyed this week's video and these 3 brilliant books, which all explore the theme of what it means to walk away from your life and start all over again. If you did like this video, please click the like button. It really does mean a lot, especially when you are starting out on YouTube like me. And do hit the subscribe button if you want to make sure you don't miss any future episodes. Next Sunday, ironically, as Britain lurches from one heatwave to another, I will be exploring what happens to the human mind when we get very, very cold. And a mysterious story about some hikers in the Urals many, many years ago, which is so baffling that people are still debating about it today. I'll be back with that next Sunday. In the meantime, have a brilliant week.